Somewhere in the high desert of San Bernardino County, California, sits one of the most important patches of ground on the planet. It is called Mountain Pass, and beneath its dusty hills lies one of the richest rare earth deposits ever discovered. And yet, for decades, the United States has depended on its biggest geopolitical rival, China, for the refined materials that come from ore just like it. America mines rare earths on its own soil. It still can't fully process them into the pure materials that power its fighter jets, its iPhones, and its electric cars. How is that possible? To understand this contradiction, you have to understand what actually happens after rock comes out of the ground. Mountain Pass has been producing rare earth concentrate for years, and the mine itself is genuinely world-class. But mining is only step one of a process that most people never think about. And it turns out that digging up the ore is the easy part. Rare earth elements almost never occur alone. Inside a single scoop of Mountain Pass ore, you'll find a tangled mixture of elements with names like neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, terbium, and more than a dozen others, all chemically similar, all clinging together at the atomic level. Separating them from each other is one of the hardest tasks in industrial chemistry. It isn't like refining oil, where you're mostly separating molecules that behave very differently from each other. These elements behave almost identically, which means a single separation might take hundreds of repeated chemical steps just to isolate one usable substance in high purity. The company behind Mountain Pass, MP Materials, has spent years and hundreds of millions of dollars building out exactly this kind of processing capability, and it illustrates just how difficult the climb has been. Even after recommissioning its separation circuits and ramping up output of neodymium praseodymium oxide, the company is still in the process of building a dedicated facility just to separate the heavier, rarer elements like dysprosium and terbium, elements that are indispensable for high-performance magnets used in fighter jets and precision-guided weapons. That facility wasn't even expected to begin commissioning until the middle of 2026, more than 70 years after Mountain Pass first started producing ore. Why does it take so long? Because rare earth separation isn't a single machine or a single chemical trick. It requires solvent extraction circuits that can stretch for hundreds of stages, each one nudging a slightly different element a fraction closer to purity. It requires enormous quantities of acid and other reagents. It requires precise temperature and pH control at every step, extensive water treatment, and constant monitoring. Because a mistake doesn't just ruin a batch, it can create a serious environmental hazard. Rare earth processing generates radioactive byproducts because the ore is often laced with thorium and uranium, elements that have to be handled and disposed of under strict regulation. All of this makes refining wildly more expensive, more energy intensive, and more technically demanding than pulling ore out of the ground, which raises the real question. If refining is this hard everywhere, why did China figure it out at scale while the United States didn't? The answer isn't a secret formula. It's 4 decades of patient, deliberate industrial policy. Starting in the 1980s, China began investing not just in rare earth mines, but in every single link of the supply chain that follows a mine. The chemical separation plants, the metal smelting facilities, the magnet factories, the manufacturing base that actually turns those magnets into finished products, and the engineers and technicians trained to run all of it. Beijing treated rare earths as a strategic asset worth subsidizing for decades, even when the industry lost money, because the goal was never quarterly profit. The goal was owning an entire supply chain that the rest of the world would eventually depend on. Meanwhile, in the United States, the opposite was happening. Mountain Pass was actually the world's dominant rare earth producer as recently as the 1980s. But as Chinese output expanded and prices fell, and as environmental and cost pressures mounted domestically, American refining capacity was gradually shut down. The mine itself went through bankruptcy in 2015. Processing know-how, the specialized engineers, the chemical plants, the entire industrial ecosystem around refining largely disappeared from American soil. It wasn't lost in a single dramatic event. It eroded year after year decision after decision, until China controlled somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of global refining capacity for these elements, even in years when it didn't control anywhere near that share of actual mining. This is the part most people don't realize. China doesn't dominate rare earths because it has the most ore in the ground. It dominates because it built the refining, the metallurgy, and the manufacturing base that turns raw material into something usable, while much of the rest of the world let that capability wither. So why does any of this matter to someone who has never heard of neodymium before this video? Because refined rare earths are quietly inside nearly everything that defines modern life. Every electric vehicle motor relies on powerful rare earth magnets to convert electricity into motion efficiently. Every smartphone, including the iPhone in your pocket, depends on rare earth elements for its speakers, its vibration motor, and its display. Wind turbines need massive rare earth magnets to generate electricity without heavy, inefficient gearboxes. Advanced robotics and precision manufacturing depend on them. Even the cooling systems and specialized components inside AI data centers and semiconductor fabrication rely on refined rare earth materials somewhere in the supply chain. And then there's the military side, which is where this stops being an economic curiosity and starts being a national security problem. F-35 fighter jets contain hundreds of pounds of rare earth materials. Precision-guided missiles, submarines, and drones all depend on rare earth magnets for their guidance systems, their sonar, and their propulsion. Every one of those systems, built by the country with the most advanced military in the world, currently depends in part on a refining supply chain dominated by a strategic rival. That is not a hypothetical vulnerability. China has already demonstrated a willingness to use export controls on rare earths as a lever in trade disputes, restricting shipments and creating real anxiety inside American defense and manufacturing companies about whether they'll have the materials they need. That anxiety is exactly why the United States government has started moving, and moving faster than it has in decades. In the summer of 2025, the Department of Defense announced an extraordinary partnership with MP Materials, the company operating Mountain Pass. The Pentagon agreed to invest $400 million directly into the company in exchange for a stake that could make the government MP's largest shareholder. It also agreed to something almost unheard of in a free market economy: a guaranteed price floor of $110 per kilogram for neodymium praseodymium oxide, more than double the price China's producers were charging at the time. If the market price falls below that floor, the government simply pays the difference. On top of that, the Pentagon committed to purchasing rare earth magnets from a new domestic facility for the next 10 years, essentially guaranteeing a customer for material that doesn't even exist yet. This is industrial policy on a scale the United States hasn't attempted for critical minerals in generations, and the numbers behind it are already showing up in the data. By early 2026, MP Materials was reporting record quarterly production of the key magnet ingredient neodymium praseodymium, up more than 60% year over year, alongside a new heavy rare earth separation facility built specifically to process elements like dysprosium and terbium that the country has never separated domestically at meaningful scale. A major manufacturing facility in Texas started producing finished magnets, the first time that had happened commercially in the United States in years. Apple signed a $500 million agreement to secure American-made magnets for its products. None of this existed at scale just a few years earlier. But rebuilding an entire industrial ecosystem from near zero doesn't happen overnight, and plenty of hard problems remain. The new heavy rare earth facility is still ramping toward a fraction of what China processes in a single year. A second, much larger magnet manufacturing plant isn't expected to be fully online until 2028. Training a skilled workforce in a discipline that essentially disappeared from American universities and factories for a generation takes years, not months. Environmental permitting for chemically intensive facilities remains slow and contentious, and America still needs partners. Allied nations like Australia and Japan are being pulled into supply chain agreements specifically because no single country outside China currently has the full picture, from mine to magnet, built out on its own. So can the United States actually pull this off? The honest answer is that it's underway, not finished. What's happening at Mountain Pass right now, backed by direct government investment, price guarantees, and long-term purchase commitments, represents the most serious attempt in decades to rebuild a domestic rare earth refining industry from the ground up. It is not simply about mining more rock. It is about rebuilding the chemistry, the engineering talent, and the manufacturing base that China spent 40 years assembling while the West let its own capabilities disappear. Whether America closes that gap will shape more than just who profits from the next generation of electric vehicles and smartphones. It will help determine who controls the materials inside the world's most advanced weapon systems and ultimately whose industrial base the rest of the 21st century gets built on.